Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all. I love the air conditioner turning on right as I'm doing this, so that way it ruins the audio. Keeping all of this in. I have to at this point because these are low polish episodes because I have to get them out very quickly. It is currently 9:44 p.m. on Saturday, October 2nd, and I'm about to review our second movie for October Nights. This video will be going live at midnight, which is not very long from now, so I don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm definitely not going to take up as much of your time as I did with Mulligan's intro. I got very political and very, all over the place describing. There's a lot more going on with that film than there is with Nightbooks. I still really love Nightbooks, and if you're a horror nut, but maybe you can't watch something with a lot of gore and violence in it, Nightbooks is a pretty good alternative. This is a PG Netflix film that is kind of fun for the whole family. Sure, it's a bit spooky, but largely, this is a pretty low stakes but fun, little adventure film with lots of horror elements and love letters to the genre that makes it so special. That and the kid actors are really charming. So, let's talk about it real quick. Nightbooks, the film, is based off of a book by J.A. White of the same name. So it's a story that's been around before, but it was adapted to the screen by two other writers, Mickey Daltrey and Tobias Iaconis, and was directed fantastically by David Yarovesky. These are fantastic people who took an admittedly fun idea and brought it to the screen in a way that is, dare I say, wholesome, and a wholesome celebration of the horror genre. And also a reminder that, those weird kids that like the horror genre even pretty young, like in middle school, they're not going to grow up to be demented psychopaths. They're having fun with this thing. So shaming them for enjoying something is probably the worst thing you can do. You'll stifle their creativity and maybe, as Alex, the main character in this thing, feel shamed enough to want to throw away their entire creative streak, want to burn every story he's ever written. That is the opposite of what we want to teach kids in school, right? We don't want to stifle their creativity. We want to shepherd it, help cultivate it. But Alex feels shamed by the fact that people think he's weird and an outcast, and the fact that his teachers are really genuinely scared that this is bad for him, that these stories and the things that he likes are bad for him. And that judgment is starting to get to him, and he's starting to hate the very things that he loves. After a particularly bad birthday party where no one shows up, the young man Alex decides that he's getting rid of horror forever. He's done. And he's going to burn the titular thing, his Nightbooks, which are where he's written down these little horror stories that are things that he loves and cherishes and keeps always. So the fact that he's about to throw away a huge part of his identity is a major thing, and it is very sad. And as someone who loves horror and has loved horror as long as Alex has, now 25 years old, it was heartbreaking to see Alex in such a state, to think that he had to get rid of this in order to feel accepted by people around him. But on his journey to destroy his Nightbooks, Alex accidentally gets trapped in a magical apartment that is home to one despicable witch. And I did say witch with a W. This is a kid's show, remember? And this witch is not really a nice person either. She's made it her job to trap young children in her apartment and to sap them of their life and anything that brings them joy. And so, while Alex may have been intending to go and burn his Nightbooks and get rid of them permanently, the witch now has a challenge for him. Write a brand new horror story every single night, or die. Or at least, this kids' film version of dying, which is being frozen in a statue forever in place to watch your tormentor as she continues to live her life and you remain in agony. So, it's like a classic kids' film of the 80s, a fate worse than death. Our young leading man, played by Winslow Fegley, is luckily not alone in this apartment. There's at least one other kid by the name of Yasmin, here played by Lydia Jewett. Yasmin's job tends to be the regular household chores, cleaning, cooking, pretty much doing everything that Alex is incapable of doing because he's tasked every day with writing a brand new story. And at first, they're kind of at odds because they really don't get along very well with one another, because Alex is still supremely focused on just escaping because he feels trapped and incapable of writing anything new because he's lost the passion he once had for writing these stories. Whereas Yasmin has kind of accepted her reality and accepted her imprisonment, but also resents the fact that she has to do a lot more of the dangerous chores that are out and in front of the witch. And I buried the lead, but the witch here is played by Kristen Ritter, and she gives a pretty fantastic maniacal turn. Yes, this is a kid's movie, but it is unafraid to get pretty dark. And that's kind of fun. It's one of those movies that toes the line with what's acceptable in a kid's film without ever crossing it. I would argue it's very similar in the vein to The Witches, directed by Nicholas Roeg back in the 80s. Or was that the early 90s? I don't remember. That film is wild, and, already it has Roald Dahl's weird story behind it, but Nicholas Roeg adapting it to the screen makes that so interesting and creative and different. And I think this film shares a lot of its DNA. Maybe not quite the same amount of crazy camera work, but you get the vibe. It's a kid's film that's kind of demented. As the relationship between Yasmin and Alex grows, so does the idea that escape might actually be possible. And so they pursue that, but have to find a way to sabotage the witch so that way they can escape this apartment. And if they do escape, they'll leave with the scariest story that Alex has encountered yet. One that just might rejuvenate his passion for the things that he's already loved, and that is the horror genre and telling great stories. One of my favorite things about this movie, beyond all the little things that it investigates and touches on, and especially as someone who is a writer, I really resonated with, is its love and attention to all the things that Alex loves, and particularly the horror genre beyond this kind of kid-friendly facing film. And Alex does love some pretty un-kid-friendly movies, specifically The Lost Boys. That's kind of the film that accidentally gets him trapped in this magical apartment that eats children to begin with. But even if this film wasn't very good, and it is, it gave us a cover of Cry Little Sister from The Lost Boys by the band Churches. And both the original song and this cover are absolutely amazing. Much like the fantastic cover that Phoebe Bridgers just did of Bo Burnham's fantastic song, That Funny Feeling, from his Inside special, this is another thing that the cover enhances, and also they're both very valuable and they're both very cool. And I want to make a playlist of original songs and covers that, are both dope in their own rights. And this song is one of them. Typically, I don't watch a whole lot of kid-friendly horror because it typically feels like a watered-down movie that would have been great had it just been allowed to be what it clearly wanted to be, which is a good horror film. Because so often when you water something down to make it for kids, you miss some of the DNA that makes those films so important. My first time when I watched The Breakfast Club was on ABC Family, back when it was still called ABC Family. And it was edited for television, so it took out all of the language, it took out all of the more serious moments in that film, including, the drug scene. And because of that, that movie lost so much of its identity that it's kind of that Ship of Theseus argument yet again that I keep bringing up. This was no longer the Ship of Theseus. This was no longer the Breakfast Club because it was missing so much of what it was. And so often when horror movies are either tailor-made for kids or watered down to be PG-13 or PG so that way kids can see them, they end up losing so much of their identity that I would not really call them a horror film. They're just kind of spooky. But this film has its share of scary moments and impeccable production design and really cool camera work. I really like the vibe of this film, and it's a shame that it's not getting seen more. And, it falls into that typical Netflix trap, especially this year when Netflix is dropping like a movie a week. gets buried so quickly, and Netflix is so ready and willing to just move on and forget about it. And it's one of the things that I genuinely, and I mean this, Netflix, I'm probably never going to get a partnership deal with you because of this. I genuinely hate about Netflix is how callous and uncaring they are about the content they produce. If you're not Stranger Things or the next big thing on their platform like Squid Game, they don't care about you. They don't care about your movie, they don't care about your series unless it's returning actual money to them. And I don't think Nightbooks is going to be returning too much money to Netflix because, to be fair, they didn't do a great job marketing this at all. I just happened to get an ad for it from the director of the film on Twitter. It wasn't even an ad, it was just, oh, you like horror stuff? Here's a director talking about his most recent horror film. And I saw it that way. Netflix has done such a piss poor job at marketing so much content this year, specifically the horror content they've been putting out, because some of it's actually been pretty dang good. It's genuinely frustrating. And Nightbooks falls into that camp, and it's so much more frustrating because kids that are Alex's age in this film might actually love it, or might actually be like, oh my god, there's a film that understands how it feels to be me, how it feels to like the things that I do, and everyone around me wants to shame me for it. When in reality, it's not that weird. It's so wholesome and such a beautiful message that I think kids not seeing this because Netflix does a garbage job at marketing their own stuff is sad to me. So I wanted to cover this as early on in October Nights as humanly possible. So seriously, if you can see this movie, even if you're not a kid, if you just want to watch, I think, a really well-crafted film that has a lot of heart and has a beautiful message, Nightbooks is it. And at just an hour and 43 minutes, it's a pretty breezy story too. It's fun, it's delightful, it's such a love letter to this genre that I would be remiss to not include it here. And it's a film that I definitely will return to. It's adorable in all the right ways, but knows how to be spooky and creative. And one thing I absolutely have to mention before I finally wrap this up, and I know I'm going over time, is there's a sequence when Alex is first telling his first horror story from one of his night books, and they switch to this really weird art house style that kind of echoes the old backdrops from the Universal horror films, with crazy lighting, tons of smoke. It's such an interesting cinematography style, and it's so different from the rest of the film that this story really feels like its own thing. And it shows that Alex is actually a really good storyteller. And that's maybe one of my favorites. It probably is my favorite sequence in the entire film, but I always love a good witch story, and this film is great in that regard. And the little twists and turns that it takes you on are kind of fun. So if you're looking for a fun, pretty wholesome horror film, you would be remiss to skip Nightbooks. And I just wish that Netflix did a better job marketing this, because you might have already seen it instead of, what even is this film? Has this come out? This film came out back in middle of September. And you're probably just now hearing about it about 17 days later, which is not good. But hopefully, if you're watching this, I've kept spoilers to a minimum. You should go check it out. And largely, I'm going to try and keep these videos spoiler-free. I talked a little bit about spoilers in the previous episode. Not going to happen in the future. I'm going to try and keep these pretty spoiler-free. But yeah, I hope you check this out, and I hope you're enjoying October Night so far. Tomorrow night, let me just check what we've got. I think it's a pretty fun, campy film. We're watching the criminally underrated 2020 film Shadow in the Cloud. It stars Chloe Grace Moretz, and it's so fun and so campy, and so much is right about it. The few quibbles that I do have are practically not even worth mentioning. This film is so fun, knows exactly what it is, knows exactly what tone it wants to commit to, and does it so well. When the scares hit, they hit hard. When the comedy hits, it hits hard. This is a film that is campy and delightful. It's like if Twilight Zone could get a bit gory. So fun. But we'll talk about that tomorrow night. So tune back into October Nights on October 3rd at midnight, and I'll see you guys then. So thanks for joining us here at October Nights. I've been delighted to be your host, Patrick Smith, and I've only got one more thing to say to you. Sweet dreams.